with a little bit of delay due to some technical issues. We have to reboot the Mac, well, to run anything. Anyway, welcome everyone to Pykonik Tech Talks number 63, our April 2023 meetup. Today, we have another very special edition at Politechnika Krakowska. So thanks to Koło Naukowe Cosmo Politechniki Krakowskiej for helping us organize the space for the event. People from Cosmo, would you like to raise your hands? Round of applause, please. Yes. So we have two talks today. One of them will be by Prince, who will going to talk about the revolutionizing software engineering and leveraging LLMs for enhanced prototyping and rezoning. And then second, we have a blog of lightning talks from Dominik. Dominik, where are you? Dominik's over there. And we're going to have a wide variety of topics from DNS records to Postgres to what's new in Python 3.11 and whatnot. And if you also would like to do a lightning talk today, then there is a slot for lightning talks afterwards. If you would like to talk, just come to us during the break and we will arrange so you can speed your lightning talk. Is there any people who want to do a lightning talk today? There's one, Maciek. Is anyone else? Okay. I'm sure some people will have more ideas during the break. After that, we will go, as usual, to a nearby pub to follow up with the discussions. And that's going to happen around 9 p.m. So, yeah, we have a talk, then a networking with a pizza break, and the second talk, and then the lightning talks. So, I already mentioned Koło Naukowe Cosmo. We have more sponsors for the event. One of the sponsors is a firm, and we have somebody from a firm today with us. Parity, would you like to talk about the company? Yes.
Hello. Hi, my name is Paridhi. Please excuse the nervousness. It's been a decade since I entered any college. I'm an Affirm employee, and for those of you who have never heard about us, don't be surprised, nobody did. So let's change that today. My company is a fintech company based out of US. Our product is a buy now, pay later product. So you buy something, you go to Amazon checkout, you don't have enough money, you convert your purchase into smaller transactions on the basis of, and we go through your credit history, we decide what kind of rate we want to give you, and then you pay us back in easy installments. What we don't do is we don't charge you any late fees, we don't change our interest rates, and there is no hidden fees involved, and that's why our business is better than our competitors. Why I'm here today is because there's going to be a talk on May 18th. And there is a QR code somewhere you can scan. And the talk is going to be about Python decorators and PySpark. So if you are interested in listening to Affirm engineers talk about that, May 18th is when it is, and you are all invited. I will stay until the first break, and I will be available if you want to chat with me some more, know about our product, or just generally have questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks to Affirm, we'll have the refreshments, the pizza, and the drinks during the break. So if you would like to know where this QR code is pointing to, it's pointing to here. So there's the event on meetup.com on May 18th. You'll be able to see all the details there, and we're also going to post that to our Discord. If you are not on our Discord yet, there is a link here. It's discord.pykonik.org. And if you would like to join another competition that we're running today for PyCharm licenses or JetBrains products licenses, go there. There is a channel called Pykonik 63, and we'll explain all the rules on the channel. And I think that's it. Anything else? Piotrek. Okay, cool. So without further ado, then let's move on to the first presentation. Prince is machine learning engineer and a developer advocate at Neptune AI, and he will talk about revolutionizing software engineering with LLMs. Please give him a warm welcome and a round of applause.
think not yet. Oh, hi. So my name is Prince, as you know. I don't come from royalty, but I'm getting there. So I am a machine learning engineer and developer advocate at Neptune by day and indie hacker by night. So what is Neptune? Neptune is a metadata store for machine learning operations. So if you want to run experiment tracking or production monitoring for your models, you can come to Neptune. So without further ado, how many of you actually code every day or are a software developer or something like that? Okay. How many of you are scared that large language models are going to take your jobs? How many? Not really? Have you guys seen GPT-4? Confused. Okay, that's a good way of putting it. So today I want to clear that out, but honestly, it's not looking good, guys. It's not looking good. We all basically gonna lose our jobs. And coding for me is super fun. So I want to save the fun for you guys. Today, as a machine learning engineer, I'm gonna show you how you can use large language models like ChatGPT, Llama, and so on to really build software in a new way. So this week, something really funny happened. I had this PR to review, and my colleague was like, "Oh, does this solve the problem?" I look at the code, and I was like, "Yeah, that does solve the problem." And then when I got into a second look, I was like, "Wait. On second thought, probably there's something wrong there. Your code looks like it's doing something different." And this is the response he sent me here. He sent me a screenshot of ChatGPT, and I'm like, "Okay, that's interesting. Let me go test it out." I actually then went to ChatGPT and asked it to create the code to test this out, and it actually checks out. It's actually quite fine. So how do you get there? So this brings us to our agenda today. We're going to talk about a little bit of the background history of where we are coming from, where we are going. We're going to talk about how LLMs can work in software engineering. We're going to talk about how to get this type of models to generate the type of answers or code that you really want or you desire. We'll talk about some real world examples. I'll show you how I built something using this process. Then we'll talk about a little bit of some ethical considerations and risks. And I'll give you a demo of what I built. How does that sound? So let's go. The background. So software engineers, we do a lot. We have product managers. We have so many people that rely on us. And we need to be able to not only dig deeper, but dig faster. Because nowadays, there's no point of doing, things the old way. And I'll talk about more on that a little bit. So let's talk about the software development life cycle. So here we have waterfall methodology, we have agile methodology, and hybrid. Why am I talking about this? I want to bring us back to where we are coming from and where we are going. So a clear example of how software is built from a high-level product manager view or company is pretty much, let's say this is a basic example. This is an old paradigm, but it illustrates really good what is the point of software development. So you gather the requirements, you design the solution, you develop it, you test it, you deploy it, and you maintain it. Of course, today we don't do things this way in a sequential manner. Today we probably do something more like Scrum, where we are iteratively developing our software. We quickly build stuff, test it out, put it out, and just continue to do this every 2 weeks or 1 week or so, depending on your company's strategy. Now, how can large language models help with this process? Any ideas? Where do you think large language models fit into the picture? Well, I'm a multifaceted person. I do machine learning engineer by passion. This is not work. This is a hobby for me. And I'm just happy that I get paid to do it. I do developer relations because I have communication skills. So that helps. And by night, I'm developing software, really going deep and building things end to end. And here are some of the examples that of my track record of some of the things I built over the years. So back in 2019, I built a high definition style transfer SaaS. So you'd give me a picture and I will transform it into the art style that you want, and it will create this beautiful image. This is an image of me, and I've done this I've generated over thousands of images, and this was back when I was in India. And you didn't only just get a digital picture, you'd actually get a physical format as well. So you use the digital one on your social media, and you have the physical one for yourself. I had one of my own, did lots of t-shirts, but people thought that I was a little bit ingrown, so I stopped doing that. So then in 2020, I built a Copilot for speech. So I really like giving speeches, but sometimes it's very hard for you to come up with an idea or really write out an outline. So I trained GPT-2 on the 100 best speeches in the world, and it started generating some really impressive things. This was what you call today when you're sending an email, you see the autocomplete. I did this back in 2020 with GPT-2, but it wasn't really good. It hallucinated and created a lot of different things. In 2022, late 2022, after ChatGPT was released, I got this idea. I was like, the technology is at the point where I can actually automate my job in a good way, because I get a lot of repetitive questions. So I created a documentation bot that will give you the answers to any of the generic questions that I already created the knowledge base for. And this brings us to 2023, where I actually scaled out that idea and thought about really managing internal documents in knowledge base. And I will give you a demo of that later on. Okay, so nowadays, at least for me, I really like the hybrid approach. At least the software requirement part, I really needed to gather something, understand the problem, and then later on I would use Scrum to develop things quickly. That's how I work alone. So I first go into this hybrid setup to really build something. And it has worked out for me really well, especially as I scale out for more advanced software. So how do you get this type of models? ChatGPT, GPT-4, Llama, Anthropic, Claude, and so on, to generate the code you want. Or sometimes you don't really want to generate code. You want to do something different, but you want the model to behave in a certain way. So this is the basic anatomy of a prompt. So this is an example of how you can think about prompting these models or asking questions. So you specify what you're trying to do, you give it some context, and of course you can expand on that context. Perhaps you have a document that, you know, or the documentation or specification of what you're trying to build. You're probably gonna paste that in, and later on, you as a human, as a person, as a human being, you have an idea of how that problem could be handled step by step. So you might as well want to describe that to the model. Say, hey, first do this, then do that, and so on and so forth. Don't just think of it as search, where you're asking for a specific answer. Here you are pretty much talking to a person. A person cannot read your mind, so as a model. So you really need to define and describe what you're trying to do. And by the way, this is an image by Alexander Claybite. He's a friend of mine, and he has really awesome content on Twitter. So this is his Twitter handle if you want to check it out, and also check out my Twitter. So here's a image or graph that I created a few weeks back when I was thinking about this problem and how you can address this. So here's how you do a high-level task instruction and context. So where you're describing the task and you're giving some context of what you're trying to do. I'm not sure if this is visible for you guys. Is it visible? More or less. Okay, so I'll just read it out for you. So high-level task description. Here's an example. Write a Python function that lists that takes a list of integers and returns the sum of all even numbers in the list. So that's the task that you want to do, and the description. So another thing that I would do personally is give it some examples. So here's an example one, a list of integers and the output, which is 12. And then another example. This is what in machine learning jargon we call few-shot learning. So these models are already really good at understanding language, and you can give it some examples so that it can pick up the task and it will kind of follow your instructions better because you gave it some examples. And after that, you send that to the model. The model is going to give you a completion, either the code or it's going to describe the task even further and break it down and just, give you the output. This is one part of the problem. Another part of the problem is reminding it. So as you go down in a conversation, you might notice that the model kind of loses information. It might start generating, let's say you're talking about Python, it starts generating C code. You might want to remind the model of what you're trying to do. So this is where you can either pass the history of the conversation, all of your previous interactions with the model, or you can say, hey, I'm actually coding in Python. And I'll show you an example of that right here. So now let's go into my process of how I built the latest software in 2023 called Kulisiwa. And I'll explain what that means. That is a native dialect of my country, Mozambique. So requirements and design. So here I was just thinking, okay, I need to build this, and it would be easier if I had a software engineering lead that would guide me through the process of like taking these requirements and breaking them down into actionable steps. So I ask it, act as a software engineer lead, help me spec and plan the development of the following software. And then I specify what my software is. A software that enables companies to seamlessly consolidate, manage, and search all of their internal data sources and processes in one secure and centralized location. That was a mouthful. That just means all of your different data sources, your Notion pages, your GitHub code could be in one place that you can easily search and ask questions on it. Then I say this platform is composed of backend and front end to specify the definition of how I want this to be built. Then I describe the workflow of how users would interact with the app, how it's kind of defined. Now, this is what the model gave as an output. It's actually much longer than this, but this is just a snippet. So it says project name, seamless data consolidation search platform. And then it says objective, develop a platform that consolidates exactly what I just said previously. And it says the scope, backend development, front-end development, integration of AI search functionality, security and user authentication, deployment and scaling, and backend development. Did you notice the error here? The first and the last point are the same. So you might want to really know what you're trying to do or really have domain experience when you're doing these things and asking questions that are, really complex, because the model can really mislead you confidently. Like the model will have so much confidence when you read, you're like, oh, this sounds amazing. Have you ever found someone that lies to you so good that you're like, oh, well, I think the sky is green. That person was very eloquent when he was explaining the problem of why the sky is green. So the models can do that. So you might want to pick up those things. So it gives you the steps, the data injection. It actually even picked up vector database. I didn't specify that I'm using a vector database, but actually I am using it. So it picked up that. Great. If it didn't, I would go through a process. Now, after I got the initial plan, I saw what the model did. I was happy with the different plans. And I said, okay, create sprint tasks based on your output. So it's a really long list. So I'll just read a little bit. Actually, these are even not all of the points. So it says sprint 1, data ingestion and backend setup. It gives me a few of the things, vector database and query processing. It kind of walks through the different vector databases and how to go about it. And it gives here some estimates of 2 weeks. Guess in how much time I actually managed to build this. It the model didn't account for one thing. It didn't know that I was actually highly optimized. So actually, instead of 2 weeks, it took me 10 hours to build the first MVP, because I leveraged the model even further and it didn't account for optimizations that I would do in my process. But this is a really good outline plan. So later on, at first I was developing the API for the backend, and I was just thinking, what is a good design for an API? So I asked it, okay, can you give me an example code or code example for the API integration? It gave me the following. It says, okay, you're going to use requests library. Good. Here's how the code would look like. I know probably it's not quite visible, but I was happy with this skeleton because it gave me kind of the idea of what I wanted to follow. And of course, I went to some of the best practices in software and just combined both. And I managed to move even faster. So after the API design, I was designing the database. I wanted a NoSQL database, and it described the database, how it's set up. And I asked it for an example. So this is another use case that is like super important. You can now, instead of having to generate the database and populate the data to really see how things are going to work, you can ask the model to populate the database for you and give you an example without the commitment of trying that technology and really putting the effort towards inputting the data into a database. So this is an example. I'll read it off for you. So this was the LLM chat history. So the chat history that you would have. I'm not sure if I can zoom in a little bit further. Okay, so here's an example. So it gave me object ID, user ID, conversation ID. This is an example. Here's the messages. User, what is the capital of France? And then the model answers, the capital of France is Paris. And this is the model doing this. I didn't ask for a specific conversation. I just said, give me some example of how this would look like using the database schema design that we previously built together. So the model populated this, and I was like, okay, I'm happy. It's the kind of design I would want. All right. So then I finished building the backend, and I wanted to build the front end. A little bit more about me. I was a full stack web developer for over 10 years. And before where I'm working now, I worked at the largest NGO in Mozambique called ADPP as a senior web developer lead. So I do have knowledge of how to build things end to end. And here's where I was like, okay, I built the back end. Let's try and build the front end. Act as my web designer and help me with my SaaS app development. And I give it more context. What problem does your app solve? It asked me this question actually. What problem does your app solve? And I was like, oh wow, this is really good. And this is GPT-4, by the way. So it's actually significantly better than what ChatGPT initially was. So it says it is, and then I explain it is AI powered. I give the examples. What is the target audience? I say small to medium businesses. What are the key features? I said being able to chat with your knowledge base using large language models. Do you have any specification, design preferences? I say minimalist, polished, and enterprise feel. Those are really abstract, but I wanted to really put the model to its paces. And then I asked it, can you help me build a side nav bar using Tailwind CSS? So interestingly enough, after I prompted the model with all those different things, I asked it to build the sidebar. It gave me this code here. The code itself is not what's amazing. The amazing part is what comes next. So I actually went to CodePen.io, which is an online renderer for HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and I just pasted the code without changing anything, and it gave me this, and I was like, wow. And the buttons work. Like everything you see here is like it's working. I was like, okay, so I have an HTML template for free without having to hustle in terms of putting things on one side, designing the buttons and all these things, all with a little bit of explanation. So this significantly boost my development because I could just prompt the model to give me some designs and I would change that into dynamic code using Vue.js. Okay, so a word of caution again. These models are not perfect. GPT-4 is amazing, significantly better than what was there before with ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, but it's not perfect. So when you're doing this, especially if you're doing this at work, please make sure you cover your bases, you do your due diligence. It's important for you to not do, just copy paste code and say that's it. It's important for you to really test out things and know what you're doing. Even double checking if there are any security flaws. Of course, you can ask the model to, give you some ideas of how you could break the system, for example. But it's always important to really go out there for experts, for example, or if you are yourself, really double check the work of the model. Now, but if you know what you're doing, the sky is the, come on guys. Exactly, the sky is the limit. So this brings us to Kulisiwa, a conversational knowledge base for internal data sources. And Kulisiwa means empower or to empower in my native language. I was looking for something different, and this is it, Kulisiwa. And here you can see the founding engineering team. So at first, the CEO and CTO, Prince Canuma, lead engineer, full stack, GPT-4, and part-time programmer, Copilot. It will kind of do a little bit of my code and just continue what I was trying to do. But here's kind of the team, and together we built what you see here on the left. Now, demo time. Let's see if we can pull up a live demo. All right. So let me turn on the front end and back end. All right. Seems to... Okay. So it seems to be working. So we log in, automatically already has SSO. So this is my account. We can come into data sources and we can add a new data source. Currently, it's only text, but we can do much more. Let's try and find some information. So what is ChatGPT? We can copy this text here, and we're going to use it later. So we can save here the name ChatGPT, text data, and then just upload. Okay, it successfully created the data source. So you can now see here ChatGPT. Now, what is the actual workflow here? The workflow is very simple. You add your data source. You can, later on, you'll be able to connect Notion and all the different sources. Actually, all you can think about. Jira is one of the first ones that I'm super excited about. And here you can come to the chat. You'll see your previous conversations. I'll show you the design a little bit later of where this is actually going. So we can come here to ChatGPT and ask it, what is ChatGPT? Okay, so I disabled streaming, so you will have to wait for the output to come all at once. But later on, you'll be able to see it output things real time, just for the sake of making it for this demo. And you can see here, ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence chatbot developed by OpenAI, released in November. It is built on OpenAI's 3.5 and GPT-4 families. And we can check the information here. It's giving us factual information. For you might say, well, this could just be copy paste. No, this is actually what the model outputted. You can see here, and even gives us a source. So let's check this source in our database. I'm using Supabase. Just quickly sign in. Okay, Kulisiwa, tables, data. And we can come here to ChatGPT and we can actually check the ID of that data source. And we see here, okay, this is the user ID. We see this ID here is the same as this one here. So it starts with A3DB, and here's also A3DB. So this is actually the model giving you the response. We might ask some different question. For example, what is GPT 3.5? Okay. So this is just one workflow, and you will be able to continuously, go through the conversation, just go through it. And actually one thing that I want, okay, here's the answer. GPT-3 is a term that has not been officially used. Okay, that's not true. It is possible that it refers to the GPT-3 language family. Actually, that is true. So they actually encompass GPT 3.5 under the GPT-3 family. But here's, a good example. And it actually mentions towards the end, it is known as ChatGPT. It's built on top of ChatGPT 3 and 4 language models. So you can ask more complex questions based on the existing data source that you have. And through the history, right now, I don't have it working, but I have in my actual Jupyter notebook where I'm actually passing the history. So you'll be able to say, you'll be able to ask a question without mentioning GPT 3.5, and it would know what you're talking about because it has the conversational history. And later on, you can output this into a doc file or whatever. Why do I say that? You remember how I described the plan, or how I got the answers from the model? That could have been a single conversation that later on I would want to transform into a document or official document that I would revise and get it to really be part of my documentation, not just in a chat history. So you'll be able to export that with this model. So kind of the future of this, I would like to show you a little bit of the future of where all of this is kind of going. Some of the things that I'm building on. So the actual final design will look something like this. Sorry, give me a second. All right, so it's probably gonna refresh and remove this annoying bar. Okay, so the future of this is for you to ask a question. And at least in my workflow, it's important to have a 360-degree view of a problem. So for example, when a user asks me a question around Neptune or around any product that I'm building, I need to be able to know if there are any issues related, because you might know the answer, but here's what usually happens. The engineering team has a Jira ticket that they didn't tell you about. The product team has a feature that it's in their backlog, and you're answering, oh, no, we don't do this right now. While perhaps you might have that 360-degree view. You know what is happening on GitHub, you know what's happening on Stack Overflow, you know what's happening on Jira, and you say, okay, so this is a problem that is well known by the company, and we will be able to you'll be able to give a more contextual answer. So this is one of the things that would help me. I am the #1 user of this because I want to be able to have a 360-degree view of a problem. I don't want to answer something, say, okay, well, you can do it this way while we already have a solution on the roadmap, or there is a better way of addressing this because I probably documented a workaround somewhere. And the great part here is like everyone that you share this data source with or this platform, because you'll be able to support teams, you'll be able to see what every single department has on a particular problem or a particular document. So this is kind of the vision of this. And now going back, let's go through the conclusion. But before that, you can actually follow me on Twitter to join the wait list. It's about to be deployed. Right now, the MVP is like working. But okay, in conclusion, you can leverage this technology, LLMs, foundational models, to really enhance your software development process and skills. So there's a lot of different things, a lot of copy paste that happens in the software development journey that we can actually improve significantly or remove completely. So you can actually focus on solving those juicy problems that are gonna really challenge your skills, and you're not stuck maintaining something that is just a simple copy paste, or you'll be able to replicate your skills, meaning building features much faster, meaning your man days are gonna be probably 3 or 4 in one. So to answer that initial question, will ChatGPT steal your job? Well, I don't think so. I think your colleague that's gonna be using ChatGPT is gonna steal your job, because he will be able to do things in one day that probably takes you a week. So instead of having 6 people in the team, they might just have 2 that are really good at 2 things: engineering and asking questions. Then another thing to remember is to instruct, give context, and remind it. And finally, make sure you know what you're doing. Do your due diligence. Never just take the code and run from the answer. Always check for the right solution. Thank you. That's a wrap. So you can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn. Any questions? Sure.
Did you do everything in one GPT-4 context? Did you summarize it, the whole process of creating the application? You said that you said about reminding it of the context. Did you do that in one conversation, or you did multiple?
So
ones?
I did 2 conversations. There are 2 big threads. One was for the engineer lead, act as an engineer lead thread, and the other one was act as a web designer. I wanted to keep those 2 separated so that I can really not mix up things and have the model confused. So I just separated them. Probably, actually, if you have access to the GPT-4 API, you can build a workflow where you summarize the conversations as you go, and be able to probably have multiple conversations around the same topic. But for me personally, I think separating them helped me not only to backtrack the steps, but to just have this clear mindset of when I'm working on something and want to improve something, and where I can go and get the answers, and also look through the history and say, and then ask, why did I actually choose this? Because sometimes you code something or you ask a question, then you come back and you're like, who asked this? Like, who's the dumb person that did this? And then you remember, oh, that person is me. So you might want to keep those things separated so that you can easily, in machine learning terms, we talk about lineage. So you can trace where something comes from. I hope that answers your question. Sure.
Plugins or GPT-4 API?
Not yet. I'm on 1,000 wait lists. But right now, GPT 3.5 does a really good job for what I want to do, and it's much faster than GPT 4. When I get to code data sources, I'll probably have GPT 4 do those, and probably balance the workflows between both of them. And in terms of plugins, actually, one thing people don't know, there is a framework that already was doing plugins way before OpenAI did, and that's LangChain. So you can use what they call agents and tools. to do browsing, to do calculator, or enhance the model in whatever way you want. And also there's new literature on how to leverage these models to do even more interesting things, like completely automated workflows where it would solve the problem for you automatically. Of course, you still need to double check things. Most welcome. Sure.
I would like to ask you, what do you think about a more alternate approach to developing software?
Okay.
Because this what you presented is like, I would say quite traditional.
Quite
but,
traditional.
Quite traditional.
Okay.
But it's just a programmer is kind of replaced or augmented with a virtual colleague living in a computer. But the alternate approach would be to leverage the model itself to do the work.
Okay.
Like this is like a no-code approach where the work is done by the model. And how far we are from that?
Oh, there are already solutions that do that. It's just that personally, that would be a product itself. For me to build a product that would do everything for you, that would be a product itself. And for me right now, the solution that I want to build, especially with my skill set, I want to have control. The problem with no-code solutions, at least that I see, is that there's a lot of control that you give away when you're using these tools. And I want to have that fine-grained control over my solution and to be able to expand it to do things, because even no-code solutions today have limitations in technical designs or technical solutions. And for me, that is a no-go, especially if I want to scale this. I want to be able to have that control. That's why I went with traditional software development. But in a way, think about this. I did that entire app in 20 hours total. There's entire engineer teams like of 6 people that are needed to build something, a solution like that, database, deployment, and all those things. But I managed to do that alone with just the aid of 2 tools. It would have taken me probably a month or 2 to build it if I didn't have these tools.
Well, I mean, I like kind of realized that this is possible by looking at like some very small things, a very small task. For instance, I have a task when I need to like take a CSV file and generate like a bunch of SQLs to as an output, right? And I can ask ChatGPT to like generate some Kotlin or Python application which will do the exact work. But I can also imagine that the model itself will do this work, especially if it had like some plugin which gives access to the file system. So,
you can do this. Actually, the OpenAI TED Talk last week or a week or 2 weeks ago, I saw they're already giving a plugin that would give ChatGPT access to a Python runtime, and it would be able to really do things like create plots and all those different things. You can do this. Like, of course, I'm getting there. I want to first solve the problem of finding those solutions. Later on, I'll probably have a workflow where you just say, analyze my business for me. And if you have all the documents there, it will analyze the entire thing end to end, ask different questions, following, of course, a process of a human, but like it would know how to phrase questions and really understand where are the weaknesses of your business, and you'll be able to improve it. Or even analyze all my code base and find out security risks. You might want to, you can do that today. It's just that it's not the solution for the problem right now. It's more of a feature for the platform I'm building, but it's like later on. And examples of that, you can check out Baby AGI, or what is the other one? AutoGPT or Hugging GPT. I'm actually gonna post on Twitter a thread on Hugging GPT, which uses ChatGPT to control other machine learning models, so you can infinitely expand the capabilities of the model. So the model will have best-in-class computer vision, best-in-class reinforcement learning, whatever other models that exist or tools, you can use ChatGPT to just leverage those tools and expand its own capabilities.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hope that answers your question.
Okay. So I'm a software developer beginner.
Okay.
And I would like to ask you if you would recommend using this for us beginners in the field.
So I would definitely recommend, but again, actually, here's the funny thing. When I started my master thesis, I'm about to finish my master. I didn't mention that. When I started my master thesis, I had the class on Scala, and I didn't know what Scala was. I knew it was a programming language, but like I didn't know how to program on it. And I used Copilot to learn how to program in Scala. So I'd ask it questions like how to create a variable in Scala, how to create a function, how to create a if condition. And I can use those things to really accelerate my learning process without needing to read a book. Of course, for me, it's easy because I know what are the basic components of programming, at least the type of programming languages I approach. So I can ask these models to give me examples of the basics. And you saw there how I asked it to help me design an API. So you can use these models to help you design, for example, a to-do list. Or here's one thing you can do. Say, act as my teacher and help me and give me assignments on how to build a to-do list, but don't give me the answer right away. So the model will give you different steps, or like first do this, and you would have to go search Google how to create a variable and stuff like that. So you can learn in a way. There are solutions right now that use these models to do quiz, but you can actually use it on your own to enhance your learning skills. But of course, definitely still read books, and as you learn, try to make it harder using the prompt kind of style that I gave you. So you can say, I'm trying to learn how to build app X. Give me some homeworks on how that would help me enhance my skills. And these models will give you those type of solutions, which you would need either a tutor or pay for a course. But now you can get it for free or for $20 a month.
Despite the learning process, what about actually development? Like you said that this tool can introduce books to your application.
Yes.
But I'm doing it myself. So so could I use it as a beginner?
Oh, I used it. I just gave you some example there where it generated the HTML, working HTML. So that was a good solution, good example, but it's not always that way. So that's why it's important for you to run the code locally, test it out, see if it breaks. For example, when you click a button, what happens? But you can ask the model to build a function for you. You just describe it. If it's a simple enough function, you can just describe it and the model will just generate it for you. And probably odds are it would work out of the box. But again, it's always important to really test out, probably talk to other experts or colleagues to really review your code and make sure you're not making those mistakes. Yep.
Do we have any more questions?
Please bring them.
So this is great for prototyping, but many of us work with the existing code base. So the legacy code, I saw nice definition. The legacy code is code that works, but not by the understanding. So did you try or do you know about any tries of using this for existing code? So for example, a learning model with existing code base and then asking it, for example, extend this feature or add some new feature and that it would find the actual place to put it, the class or the module or something?
That's a fantastic question. Spot on. So actually, there's another part that I didn't explain here. It's like you can give it the code, say, hey, I want to extend this code. And here it is. I want to create a feature that does X, Y, Z, especially with GPT-4. I will highlight that. GPT-4 is like the best with code compared to GPT 3.5. So you can give it the code, or you can, the first question you can ask is, explain me the code. So it would break down how the code works, just to help you give them, you are coming in, you probably don't have any prompts on how the code base works. And it's going to take time. If you ask your team, you can just ask the model, explain me how the code works. Or you can go from there and ask someone else and say, hey, here's what I understand how the code works. Tell me if I'm wrong somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong somewhere. And then you can come back and say, hey, okay, based on the code I provided you earlier, help me create the feature that does X. You might not go straight into the code, but you can ask it, give me the steps first. It would describe the steps on how it would build that feature. Then you can say, create the code for me. Then you test out the code. If something is wrong, if you get an error, this is something I did a lot of times. Sometimes I would create something, it would give me an error. I would actually just bring back the error, paste it, and the model will know, oh, okay, sorry. So it's like, this is the new API, you're using Python, whatever, and it would correct it for me. Or for example, in terms of like the UI for the front end, I would ask it to place something somewhere. And when I actually run the code, after the first example, the perfect one, things wouldn't look okay. I would say, okay, things don't look okay. Can you correct it? And it would try again. And one particular example, it was using a different library than the original one I asked it to do. So I reminded it. I said, hey, I'm using Flexbox. Can you place this element in the place I asked in the beginning? And it was like, oh, okay, sorry, my bad. And it generated the code that I just pasted in, and it was working. So those are like, you can really dig deep and understand an entire code base. And actually, one of the things that I later on want to be able to do, this is a personal experiment of mine, is connect with GitHub and be able to query my entire code base and just ask it to give me suggestions on how to improve my existing code, for example.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what are the limits, because that works if you have like few thousand lines, but if 100,000 of lines of code,
yeah, well,
the context is probably limited to 30 kilobytes. Yes. So.
No, the context is limited to 32,000 tokens.
Tokens, yeah.
Yes. So a token is 4 characters. So you would have around you could fit an entire PDF with probably 7 to 50 pages.
But not the code of the huge
probably not an entire code base. And I don't know if you're gonna be fixing an entire code base of 10,000 lines. I would be more objective. If you're just trying to do a particular section of the code, you can ask the model to give you examples on that instead of trying to fit your entire code base. That would be hard. But I think GitHub Copilot X, which I'm on the waiting list for, it's going to be sometime in June, probably will be able to do this because GitHub pretty much has access to all of your code. Probably they will be able to scan your entire code base. But yeah, I can actually do that with this software right now. You just put in your GitHub account, and I will just copy all of your code into a vector database. And then you'll be able to ask it questions, and it would, if you ask a question, a particular section about a particular section of your code, it would fetch that information and just give you the description of that part. Also keeping in mind all of the different related parts about around that section.
Okay, so still,
but you would need a more advanced solution than just ChatGPT currently. Perhaps with plugins, it would be able to work better.
And still there is some work for us.
Yes, there's a lot of software engineering that needs to go around this type of models to enhance it. Like, the models are great on their own, but they are a small part of a bigger problem, because now we have engineering problems that we didn't have before. That's where vector databases is even a new concept. These companies are raising millions, tens of millions of dollars, and they just started like 3-6 months ago. So there are new engineering challenges, and there's a lot of different people, individuals and teams trying to tackle this. Currently, I'm an individual, but probably later on I would like to scale and be able to imagine. I just think about if I had a twin, we would probably be way along the line if we both could do this together or have a team.
Thank you.
Most welcome.
I-
Questions?
Yeah, I have a small comment on the previous question
Sure.
and your answer. Fair warning to everyone, be careful what you are putting into the ChatGPT or
Oh, yeah.
other tools like that. Do not put any private code that isn't yours,
Yes.
because first of all, the employees of it have full access to all prompt, and they will select some prompts to learn from them future the bots. So your input can be provided to somebody else as output, and you will leak private code of your company or everything. So please don't put any proprietary code in there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fair warning, and actually, OpenAI has been addressing this. So you can select which data the model is gonna train on, but this was a feature that was released, I think yesterday. I saw they just released a feature that you can select what data is gonna be used to train the next model. And personally, for me, I have no intention of like leveraging the existing data of users. It's more of like, later on, if you want to take your data and have a model that is specialized in your data, I'll be able to provide such a service, but it will be only for you. Even right now, all users have, at least on the database, at a database level, they have row level security. So no two users will be able to access someone else's data. So these are just things, and I understand that's a really good warning. In the beginning, it was that way, but they are understanding now with users that people have security issues, especially with proprietary data. And at least me personally, and some of the companies that are actually listening to users, they understand that that's not a good practice to like use your data. But you can use it to train a model that's going to be better for your solution. And it will be a part of the platform. Questions?
Any more questions?
Great. Okay. Feel free. Ask away.
So you said that the model sometimes is overly confident. You can say that, and I've been using it, and I've noticed that because I've been using it, if I like search something on the Google and then the solution didn't appear on like first, second, and the third page. So I was just like desperate. I said, okay, let's try this, and I've noticed that it's hallucinating. I think that's the correct term. It's hallucinating the answers sometimes, and I couldn't let it, I couldn't make it actually provide me anything that's useful. I mean, I've noticed that it is mostly linked to, stuff that you cannot easily find on the internet sometimes. I was like dealing with some Terraform issues. I wanted to write an example code, but it couldn't provide it anyway. And my question is basically, is it possible to even make it admit that it's like don't have enough data? So I like avoid this, back and forth, conversation. It's like, if you don't have enough data to like come up with something, like, can you state it? Like, is it possible to make the model, acknowledge that?
Yeah, that's where prompt engineering comes to solve this issue. My model, for example, I right now this version doesn't have, but the previous version for the documentation, I would ask it to say, hey, actually, you need to ask the model to not try to make up stuff. And another thing that comes to the aid of hallucinations, which you just mentioned, which is when the model spits out complete utter bullshit, but like it does it in a confident way. What you do is use a knowledge base that you can retrieve information, and you tell the model only respond according to the information you are fed. And if you don't know, say I don't know. For example, if I ask my model who is Miley Cyrus, it would tell you I don't know, because that's not a part of my knowledge base. But if that is in your account, you say who Miley Cyrus is, it will be able to do that. Or if you give it access to the web and say, hey, you can use the web to find any information. And if you don't find the information on the web, say I don't know. So that is one way. Another way, I just read a paper and I dissected it and put it on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's something called chain of thought. So you have the model describe how it's solving the problem, and you can read the thought process of the model to be able to understand how it came out with a particular answer. And in the case of the paper I was reading, they expanded on that, where the model was aided with visual features for certain problems. Let's say if you ask the model, what happens if you put magnets in a particular situation, the model without visual features, it would say, the correct answer is the magnets would attract, while in the actual case the magnets would repel. So what the authors of the paper did is that they fed the model images or description of the image alongside the question, and that fixed around 62% of the hallucination problems. So there are multiple ways to address this, and the literature around this is very vast right now. It's still not a solved issue, but you can see the improvements with things like GPT-4 and even other techniques like the ones I just described that are in papers. If you want to find out, I have a really large list of papers I'm reading constantly and just posting what I find, and this is all free for you to find out on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Okay, I'm going to claim the last question since I have the microphone and we have a sort of deadline because the pizza is getting cold.
Yep.
So one last question from me. As a heavy ChatGPT user myself, you mentioned that you get more effective. There's a lot of code that you can generate. And especially in companies, what used to happen is like if you had a lot of that boilerplate code, you would hire junior engineers to generate that code and then to learn from that code during that process, from both writing the code and debugging that code and also working with the senior engineers. Now, with the ChatGPT, there's this temptation to replace junior engineers with ChatGPT. If we replace junior engineers with models like that, where do senior engineers come from?
Oh, so that is the great part. Like, my work building that app was this was fantastic, because what happened is that I was a bit lazy to begin, because I was like, I need a visual representation of what I need to do. I designed it in Figma, and then I really needed to generate the boilerplate code, which is the structure, and then I would style it the way I want. And my job was just more of like handing over the tasks and describing the problem and having the model do things and just do that back and forth. So as a senior engineer, now you go from doing the boilerplate code yourself or having to hire juniors to a more of like managerial role where you're just kind of at the piloting seat and just, pushing buttons and just having things work the way you want. It makes it better. Of course, junior engineers can level up. Mid engineers can become seniors because they can now focus more on the architectural side of things instead of having to be coding that simple feature that is just like a 2-line change. You can just easily just describe the problem. The model will just generate those 2 lines. If you're not happy with it, you can just say, hey, for example, let's say it outputted a for loop. You can ask it, can you give me an example on how to do this without a for loop? Because you're optimizing for speed, for example. So you can do those things. And actually, just yesterday, I did this. I was doing, since I'm rendering information and probably a lot of text, my role was more of like, this is probably a design flaw if I have like three or four for loops. I want to reduce the numbers. So I asked the model to optimize those certain parts and just go with it. Junior engineers now need to learn how to use these tools, have it become a part of their arsenal, but just don't put a lot of weight on it. Really try to build and push your skills. For me, this is me pushing my skills even further and doing something that probably thousands of people will be able to use. And I will need to learn a lot of the different things I don't know, like, different DevOps things and MLOps. Well, that part I know, but like I would need to do a lot more. And imagine if I can do it alone. That means I learn a lot more. And so this is also a plea for me to you to really try and take this and build something. Try and build something with it, see how it feels, see where things are not okay and you're not gonna rely on it, and have it as a part of your arsenal, because I'm telling you, it's not gonna replace you, but your colleague is definitely gonna take your lunch. I hope that answers your question.
It does a bit. I have follow-up question, but we
Sure.
can ask that. Or I can ask that and you can answer that later.
Okay, sure.
So first of all, thank you for the answer.
Most
And
welcome.
a round of applause from everyone for Prince. And now on to a break. We have a pizza here. We have water over here. And we're going to take about half an hour. And then we're going to move to the lightning talks first with 5 lightning talks by Dominik. And then if you also want to do a lightning talk, you can just come up here and then do the lightning talk yourself. So yeah, see you later. Oh, Dominik, let's round of applause for Dominik.
So welcome everybody. I'm Disconnected, Disconnect 3D, not 2D. And I'm going to talk about 4 different topics. So let's begin. So the first topic I would like to speak about is this conference called 17, or actually 17 sesja Linuxowa. It's a Polish conference about Linux. And it was last week in Wrocław. And it's free basically, so you can maybe join us next year. But basically, this conference website is on this address 17.sesja.linuxowa.pl, right? And currently it doesn't work, but we created the next edition of it, but the next edition actually doesn't work right now anymore. But we have created a next edition called 18 sesja Windowsowa, so like a Windows session instead of Linux session. And it was on this URL, it's not there anymore, but the question is, how did we achieve that? Because like I'm not the owner of the the domain. I'm not really organizing this conference and so on. So the question is, how did we manage to host something on a subdomain on their domain? So apparently, and I can actually show you on the Wayback Machine that there was a day during the conference that you could go to this URL and the Windows session would load for you, and we created a pretty nice front end with this Microsoft GitHub logo and some kind of content that was really close to the content from the original website. We also included here like a YouTube video about what are CNAME records, because that's related how we managed to do this deface stuff. And our logos as well. So the question is, how did we achieve that? And the answer is pretty straightforward. There are DNS records, right? And if you have your own domain, like I have here on ovh.com, if you buy one, you can create different types of DNS records. And one of those records is of a type CNAME. And if you create such a record with a star, so this is like a wildcard record, so that whatever I put in front, like whatever I put instead of this star in this domain, it will basically be aliased to this blah, blah, blah GitHub IO. And I can actually show you this on a terminal session here. We can use the dig tool, which can be used to basically ask about domains. I think it was this. So if I ask about this domain, it will the DNS server will tell me, hey, there is the CNAME record that points here, and then I can go to this URL to resolve the website or the IP address of the server. I think the IP addresses are actually here, maybe. But if we try this URL here, there is nothing here. I mean, we just get 404 from GitHub Pages. And this says GitHub Pages, and actually the Sesja Linuxowa.pl website is also hosted on GitHub Pages. So GitHub Pages is from GitHub, so you can have your own repository for your own GitHub page. And if you do so on an account like I have here on DC3D test, then if you go to settings to pages, you can configure the domain of your GitHub Pages website. And I have configured this domain to be in something.dc3dxyz, which is clearly not the same as my account name or the repository name here, right? And it's clearly, and if you look up this domain here, dc3d test GitHub IO, it's definitely not the same as blah, blah, blah GitHub IO, right? But the way GitHub works is that, I can just save here a subdomain on this domain, just because there was the CNAME record that was pointing somewhere to GitHub IO. It doesn't have to be blah, blah, blah. It can be anything, .github.io. But because there is this like wildcard, if I put something else here, like something, it will also resolve to the same domain. And since it resolves that this way, then if I go to this website without the dot at the end, sorry, not blah, blah, blah. It has to be something because I saved it as something in the it doesn't have to GitHub IO, it has to be this domain. And now we can see a hello Pykonik rendered here. And this hello Pykonik comes from my GitHub page. So, it's here, index.html, and you have hello Pykonik here. So basically, you created your own GitHub page on GitHub. You went to the settings, to pages. You put here a domain 18 sesja linuxowa.pl. You save it, and then your GitHub page will render on this subdomain. Why? As I said, because they configured the CNAME record in the DNS incorrectly. So they used this wildcard or asterisk there instead of pointing to a specific subdomain. Now it's already fixed, so this doesn't work anymore. So I cannot really show you that I can go to this 18 sesja linuxowa, but as you could see on Web Archive, it was there back then. Yeah, so that was my first lightning talk. Are there any questions about it or comments?
I have a small comment on that. You can actually verify your domain to your account on the GitHub, so nobody can do such attack if you mess it up. But it has a caveat that it doesn't propagate. You can verify domain works for that domain and any one level down subdomains, but the star in the CNAME record works all the way up, where the A records work only on one level deeper. So there's a warning in the docs of the GitHub about that to watch out for it.
Yeah, and one more thing, if you do dig on the incorrect domain, you can see no replies here. If you do this on 17th, you can see this ASI, pvr, GitHub.io, and probably same for the other ones because they set it up correctly now. So they have separate CNAME records without the wildcard now. Yeah. So let's go to the next topic. The next topic is about a Postgres bug. And here is a story around it, which is a task from a CTF competition. CTFs are security competitions. The task was called Collector. It was from Plate CTF, which was 2 or 3 weeks ago. And in this challenge, we basically had 4 components. And one of them was the frontend or backend, actually frontend and backend written in Node.js. Then there were 2 Postgres databases. There was a main DB, which was replicated to a worker DB. And there was a webhook, which was written in C. It was being run on ARM64 architecture. It doesn't really matter if that's ARM or another, but it was like this in the challenge. And what you could do is, and basically webhook was connected to the worker DB, but the front end and backend was connected to the main DB. So, the webhook was getting the data that was replicated, and the front end was pushing data to the main DB or the backend actually. Yeah, and what you could do, you could send an HTTP request, obviously, to the front end and to the backend, and you were sending a webhook. In this webhook, you specify the kind of the webhook, the target where the webhook would connect to, and then some kind of secret. Then this webhook was pushed into the database. It was replicated in the replica, and then the webhook program was reading it, and eventually it was issuing an HTTP request with the libcurl library. In this CTF challenge, the flags of the secret that you had to leak was inside the database. So you basically had to access the some kind of table in the database somehow, in an unintended way. And the way for doing that would actually be here, getting code execution inside of the webhook program that was written in C. So you had to write an exploit that would hack this program. You would be able then to spawn a shell or something on this Linux that was running there, and then you could issue whatever request to the database you wanted. So this was clearly not a trivial task. I spent 20 or more hours on it, and I didn't solve it with my team. But let's see how you can deal with such a challenge. So first of all, we had this webhook program, and we didn't have a source code for it. We only had the binary itself. So we had to disassemble it and then decompile it and analyze it. So here you can see a screenshot from Gidrad. That's a tool for reverse engineering software, native programs. And on the left side, you can see disassembly. On the right side, you can see the compilation. Clearly, the compilation is much more readable. You can see some kind of SQL queries there, for example. In the disassembly, you just see pure, CPU instructions, which is not so I mean, it's not very hard to read and understand, like single instructions if you just look at the specification, but it's really hard to follow or understand the whole program this way. Yeah, so we have this decompilation, and you can see those SQL queries here. So this webhook program, it triggers some kind of select SQL query from a hooks table with some where clause, with filtering the kind that you specify. Later on, it will issue another SQL query, another select here, and it does something with the results. And for example, here, this is very not so trivial to understand. Like, who the hell writes code like this? Well, no one, because this is decompiled code. It's not the code that someone has written. It's reverse engineered by the tool, and the tool has some heuristics to like take the assembly and rewrite it in C. And it's not ideal. It's not that good always. So the code here, if you would like click on some of those lines, it would point you that disassembly code for those lines. And for example, here one of those lines would correspond to this instruction, which is called sub for subtraction, sp which is stack pointer, and then sp.kindCount. And what this instruction does is it it takes a stack pointer. So this is like a pointer to some memory in the programs, in the program memory space. It subtracts it by some value. So it puts it on lower addresses. And if you would know some C and like reverse engineering and stuff like that, you would know that this corresponds to a C function called alloca, which allocates memory on the stack. So clearly Ghidra doesn't play well with such a thing, but you can realize it if you have experience with those kind of things. But let's skip all this C or low-level stuff. Let's go back to more interesting stuff. So in a nutshell, in this challenge, we had those two SQL queries. We have the first query, which was doing select count star from hooks, where kind equals some kind that you provided. Then if the counter that was returned from the query was bigger than 10, it was limited to 10. And then there was another SQL query that was doing select target secret from hooks, where kind equals the kind you specified, and then order by target limit 10. So this second query was limiting the number of records returned with a limit clause in SQL instead of doing this in code. And then there was some bug there was some low-level bug where if those two counters would be different, you would be able to exploit the program. And we are going to skip this part. We won't really try to do it here because it would take probably 2 hours or something to try that, or probably even longer. But the question is, how do you exploit this scenario? You have two SQL queries that are executed. Clearly, they are like targeting the same table with the same filtering clause, where kind equals some kind. And by the way, there is no SQL injection here. Like if you provided like a apostrophe or this quotation, this single quote in the kind, you couldn't really escape from this query because it was properly like sanitized. So there was no SQL injection here. But you could think of another scenario, like maybe between those two queries, someone could delete records from the database or maybe insert more records. So there is like an attack vector which is called race condition here. So you can do something between those two queries. But the problem is it's very, very hard to trigger such a scenario. Like when we tried this, like doing this challenge, we tried this, this race condition like multiple times, and we triggered maybe a few times per like 10 minutes or something. And you would have to do that on some remote server that is not yours. You are not localhost there. So the connection would be a problem here as well. And this was not actually the intended solution. I mean, you could maybe solve it with race condition, but it would be very, very hard to do so, to reproduce it properly. So the question is, what else can happen here? And the problem is that I don't have this on slides, but I can show it here. Or maybe I can even show this on like code. So we had like some sources for this, and this webhook C is not the code for the webhook because we didn't get it. It's the decompiled version. But if we go to the main DB, for example, and check its Docker file, and then on the right side, we will go to worker DB and check its Docker file, those Docker files are a bit different. And actually, the organizers gave us a hint that, hey, please look at the Docker files for the main and worker DB, because it matters. And if you see here, the first Docker file, the main DB, is using Postgres 15.2 from Alpine Docker image. Or like distribution. And the second one, the worker DB, the replica, is using Bullseye, which is Debian, basically. So there is some difference between those two, maybe. And I have launched those databases here, and I can show you that if we do, and I can show you that we have an empty database here and here from the hooks table. But let's do something simpler. Let's do a select clause like this. So we are basically comparing an uppercase A with a small a. And on the main DB, so this is Alpine, it tells you false. But on the Debian side of things, it will tell you true. So hey, we have Postgres, which should probably return to you the same results. Because the database is replicated, it should have the same configuration and so on. But it does not. Someone could say now that, hey, probably there is some locales, collation, or something that is different between those two databases. And if I remembered how to, investigate this, I would show you that those are the same in those two databases. So there's the same locale settings, there is the same collation, but there are different results for those comparisons. And the result for this is that the Alpine uses Mussel glibc library, and Debian uses glibc library. And between those two libraries, there are some differences in how they interpret locales or collation in some of the functions there. So this is actually a bug in Alpine where there are different results because of this bug. Now, how do we exploit this scenario? Because what we have to do, we need to take those two queries and have different results being returned from them. So I have here some kind of Python script that I will briefly show you. It's not really that interesting, but what it does is it inserts those hooks with some kind of, I think, target value of uppercase and smaller case A, and it will insert 4,000 records there to the database. And if I execute it, hopefully it will work. Not sure why there is maybe select count from hooks. So we now need to wait until it inserts those 4,000 records to the database because that takes a while to send like 4,000 HTTP requests. But after we send it, I will be able to show you those queries. First of all, we have 4,000 records here. And now let's try doing the select count from hooks where kind is equal to small a. There's 2,000 of those records. Here, there is also 2,000 of those records because that's how we inserted it. If we do the same on the Debian side of things, it will also just tell us 2,000 with uppercase. It's 0. Did this not replicate yet? If I try again, it's still 0. Maybe if I try select star from hooks and try to see if there are those records with kind equals uppercase A. And hey, they are there. So what is actually happening here? There are those records, but if I'm trying to query for them, I cannot find them. I can show you that even without count, we won't be able to. Oh, without count, we are actually able to find them. But with count, we cannot, which is even more funny. And the result for this is that between those two databases, they are replicated. So we have the main DB that is sending the data to the worker DB. But there is one more thing that I haven't said about. There are indexes in these databases. So I maybe can show you that there is some kind of index here. Oh. It's here in the main DB. It's created. Yeah, and you have those two lines. So we are creating indexes in the database, one for like kind, target, and secret, and the other one for just for kind. And so the way the Postgres replica works here, or how it's configured, is that the main DB will create the index, it will compute it, recompute it on each insert, and then it will, send this index to the worker DB or updates this index. I'm not sure how it exactly works, but the index is also replicated. And since the index here, it's like some kind of binary tree, I think, or like actually it's a B-tree plus structure under the hood. And I'm not going to go into details because I don't know them that good myself. But the thing is that this index will have to use comparisons on those keys, like kind, target, and secret, or kind, depending on which index is used. And since we have this, difference between the comparison between the two Postgres databases, the main DB is building the index using one comparison, then sending this index to worker, and the worker is using this index and comparing it with a different comparison that returns different results. So that's why those results are not found. And I can show you then that since we had a difference here, like because what we eventually have to achieve is to have those two SQL queries to return different results. So we have this first query, for example, with a smaller a, it returns 2000, and the second query with select target secret from hooks where kind equals small a, it will return 0 results. And here's the discrepancy that allowed you to exploit then this low-level program and achieve code execution there. And like for me, it was really weird that this can actually happen. And actually, it was already reported like in 2 different places. First of all, there is a thread on like PostgreSQL, some mailing lists, I think, from 2014, where someone, which is TripAdvisor, they were basically migrating database from one version of distribution to another, and there was difference between the glibc versions in those two. So not really Mosul and glibc, but different versions of glibc. And the second place where it's documented is like a Stack Overflow, like Docker difference, Postgres 12, Postgres Alpine. And someone is actually showing here that, well, first of all, someone is saying that Alpine images use Mosul, which does not support LC collate. So even if you set the language variable, it will sort with byte-wise comparison. And it's supposedly fixed in Mosul, in like a newer Mosul version, but also someone points here that you can use some kind of arguments whenever you launch Postgres so that it actually fixes this issue. But yeah, they also show here this example with different comparison. Yeah, so that was it. And I have 2 more topics. So first is environment variables quirks. Who uses environment variables to store their secrets in like CI/CD or some deployments and things like that? Not everyone. Another way to do this is to place those secrets in some files and bind mount those files and make sure the privileges to those files are set so that nobody else can access them. Because the problem with environment variables is that if you have a program like this, maybe I'll show it in Vim. So we are basically showing the API key environment variable, then we are waiting for some input, then we will try to, clear this environment variable, and I will tell you in a second why. And then we will print this again. If I launch this program here, okay, I didn't have this variable, but I will do one more thing. I will create an environment where I don't have any environment variables, and I will just set this one. ABCDEF, Python 3. Oh. Yeah, so I launch this process, and the API key is ABCDEF. But if I take the process identifier of this program and look into the proc file system, which is like a virtual file system rendered by Linux kernel, I can basically inspect the environment variables it has. And this process itself could also inspect its own environment variables this way. So if this would be like a web application with some path traversal vulnerability, where you can render any files on the system by traversing through ... by just jumping out of directories, then you could render those environment variables and you could steal them, which may be very bad. So maybe we can fix this by overwriting this environment variable like this, right? And if I try to do this, the API key is now just stars. But if I try to render it here again, it's still with the same old value. The question is why. So the way things work is that whenever you launch a process, you are basically using the syscall called execv on Linux. And in this execv syscall, you provide environment variables. Then the Linux kernel takes this syscall and it will spawn the process for you. It will take all those environment variables and it will copy it to the memory of the program. So the environment variables are copied to the memory of the program. But then if you want to access those environment variables from Python or C or any other programming language, those runtimes are also copying this copy of memory to some other place, like to a dictionary in Python, to basically be able to modify those environment variables, delete them, add more, and so on. But the old copy stays intact, and the Linux kernel basically renders this file from this copy. So in theory, we should be able to overwrite this copy because that's the program we are in, so we should be able to access this memory. And yeah, it's possible, but it's very non-trivial to do it in Python. In C, that would be very trivial. We could probably do something like import C types, do C types, cdll, just load libc library. This libc library has this global environment variable called environ. And then you can take the address of this variable and then you can modify the memory there. I obviously do not recommend to do this. And there should be actually a solution for this, but I haven't found one. So I'll probably create a library for doing this because it's kind of stupid that it's there. Yeah, and the last topic I wanted to speak about is CPython 3.11 and some performance stuff. And if someone was on last beer, they probably saw some of this. But we have basically a program here, which you can see on the left side. And I will comment some code lines here because we don't want them right now. Okay, so this program will actually create just two functions, the foo function and the add function. And I will try to do it maybe this way because I want another console as well, because we want to launch two different Python versions. And I will do this, and I will do this. Those scripts are basically launching IPython in Python 3.10 and 3.11 in Docker containers. And they load this script so I can run it so that those functions will be defined. And on the left side, we have 3.10. So we will now use the So this is a built-in module in Python that allows you to disassemble Python code to Python bytecode. And so we can compare the bytecode of this function between those two versions. So in 3.10, the first instruction here is set up finally. It is there basically to set up the except blocks, or actually the final block from the try except final clause. We don't have this block, but it's the instruction must be there, and it probably will set it so that we jump somewhere like here, I think. And then you have some kind of pop block, and this line return 1, it's implemented in those two lines. So we have 2 lines of setup that are basically doing setup finally and pop block in 3.10 whenever we are entering a try block. In 3.11, there's this return 1 is just here, but for the setup we have resume and nop. Nop is like no operation. It is there only because they didn't optimize it yet, but this nop will not be there in future versions, I think. But it does nothing, so it's much faster than, for example, pop block. So in 3.11, they optimized exceptions in Python in such a way that the non-except block is much faster than it was before. Because previously, you had to do some kind of setup in order to enter the try except block. now those two instructions are not doing the setup, and basically there is no setup. So the way it works is that whenever an exception would actually happen here, like in this return one or basically in this try block, they would probably, I think, I'm not sure, somehow go into this line or maybe further to actually like resolve this exception somehow. I'm not like 100% sure, but it's optimized in this way. This may mean that the except block may be more expensive now, like may take longer time, and maybe, I'm not sure honestly. Probably it is more expensive. Okay, the second thing I wanted to show you is that when we have this add function that basically adds two numbers, right? We can disassemble it, and if we disassemble it, it will show us pretty much the same, except on 3.11 we have this resume. This resume is on like every block, every code block. So we can see this is almost the same. Here is binary op with an argument of plus. Here is binary add. So it seems like they removed binary add but created binary op with arguments. But there is a difference because this interface now takes some additional arguments in 3.11. And those additional arguments is show caches and adaptive flags. So we can try to use it. Show caches true, adaptive true. And okay, now it shows us a bit more. So there is another instruction called cache here, which I think it probably caches some results, right? But what else is different? They created something which is called like specialized bytecode instructions, which are specialized in runtime based on the execution. So if we try to execute this add function like 1,000 times and just add something like this, I executed it 1,000 times. And now if we disassemble it, we will see that now it will, instead of binary op, there will be binary op at int instruction. So the Python runtime was seeing that, hey, you are always adding two integers because I provided here two integers. So it modified this instruction so that it will emit an instruction that adds int. Now, what happens if I execute it with two strings? Because we can add strings, right? This will obviously work. So this instruction will actually have to check whether those two types that you provide are actually ints, and if not, if they are, execute a fast integer addition. If they are not the same, it will go to the slower path that will execute the normal binary op. Now the question is, did this de-optimize now? Because it was optimized so that it was working with ints, and now we added strings, but it did not de-optimize. Instead, there is some counter in the cache which was decremented. And finally, if we tried to execute this like 52 more times, it would still not de-optimize. We would have to execute it more times. So if we do something like add strings this way and now execute the this, we can see that it will optimize in a different manner. Now it's optimized for adding Unicode strings. So they did some kind of, just-in-time optimizer kind of thing. It's not really just-in-time compiler. Well, you could probably say so, but it's still like poor with some simple heuristics like counting things. But it's there, and they will improve further, I guess. And that's pretty much it, what I wanted to show you. So thank you.
I'll go get you with the we have one question from the stream first. So the question is for the first lightning talk, actually, from Lukasz. He was asking, let me just figure out how to rephrase that question about the CNAME record. So they will have to add that CNAME sooner or later, be it in the form of a star or the number 18. So just saying don't use the star doesn't actually help them from protecting us from the attack in the future. Is that correct or not?
So the question is if using star protects us?
The question, I guess the question is that because you're already squatting that domain, they will add that record in the future to run the next conference. Does that mean that it will still resolve to that fake website, or will they be able to reclaim that domain?
I'm pretty sure they can use this verification feature to reclaim the domain. Well, that's first thing. Second thing is, since they removed the star, it's not working anymore. Additional problem here is that if you would have a CNAME targeting a CNAME without a star, but targeting something GitHub IO, and you would not use it on GitHub pages yet. Someone can use it instead of you. And then you have to use this feature from GitHub to take out the control from this person.
Yes, my suggestion would be maybe can you show that process roughly of reclaiming the domain?
I don't remember where is it on GitHub, if you're asking about this.
I don't know where the reclaiming is, but I know where the setting up the protection is. Somewhere in the
I logged
somewhere in the
out.
documentation.
I logged out from my account, my test account, but I have obviously my own GitHub pages as well. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure where you reclaim it, but it's probably somewhere in Learn More and somewhere here, verifying your custom domain for GitHub pages. There's a warning with the star, I think. We strongly recommend that you do not use wildcard DNS records. And you can verify it. Yeah, I'm not sure how you do it, but you can do it somehow.
Okay, now we have a second question from Prince.
So you're talking about the environment variables and how they can be exposed. So one of the things I did when I was developing the API is to have a main process, and that is going to call other Python files that have access to the environment variables. Have you tried this kind of layered approach, and if it still exposes the environment variable? If all the user does is like just has the endpoint on the main file, and then that main file calls other files that have the environment variables.
So the question I would ask here is that, are those two processes in the same PID namespace? You can think of PID namespace as a Docker container. Because
yeah, they would be.
If they are in the same Docker container, the second question is, are they spawned from the same user? If they are spawned from the same user, I believe you can access... Well, first of all, here on right bottom, I have a console with the same user, but another process, and this another process can access this here.
I was just thinking in the context of like APIs, like let's say a REST API, would this kind of attack work?
Well, so
if all the user does is just hit the endpoint.
You know, there are different kind of attacks you may have here. The problem is actually showing up whenever you find some kind of bug that allows you to read files. If you don't find such a bug, that's probably okay. But if someone finds that this bug, there should be a mitigation for this kind of scenario. And you know, one mitigation that you could do is unmount the proc file system. The problem is that a lot of stuff uses the proc file system to see things, like the tool PS is actually reading the process identifiers from the proc file system, and this is the information that is also provided there.
I see.
But if I tried, for example, to take a root process, is there any root process? Like process, here's some Postgres process, which is from user ID 70. There's no even like a username for this. If I try to read its environment variables, I cannot do this because I'm not this user. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers my question.
Do we have any more questions to any of the lightning talks?
Or comments?
I have a question about the replication lightning talk. Why did you use Ghidra for that?
Because I don't have IDA Pro for ARM64, and the free version doesn't allow you to decompile ARM64 or even disassemble it. Yeah, and Ghidra is actually pretty okay. I mean, IDA is better, but yeah.
About the other free version?
I don't use the other free version because, I don't have a need for that. Ghidra is enough.
Okay, any more questions? In the absence of other questions, another question about the environment variables. So what is a better way of storing secrets than environment variables?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, you could create a library that would clear this environment variables at some point whenever you call a function from this library. So that's something we should implement for each runtime there is, and then, just call it in some init function, because that would prevent those kind of stupid mistakes where someone can access the environment variables. well, as an alternative, you can use files, as I said, but then there you have a file that you have to store somewhere. You have to mount it. You need to be sure that the permissions are correct and so on. So, and it's a file on a disk, which can further be, backed up with some system. On the other hand, environment variables can also be saved in backups because in disk backups, because if this is environment variable in the program memory, the memory of the program can be swapped on the disk if it's not used for a long time, and then it can leak through a backup. Another thing is that environment variables can also leak through some kind of systems that monitor your programs, like, I don't know, maybe Prometheus, but probably it already changed the secrets to asterisk, I guess, at least, I'm not sure. On the other hand, if you would override this in the memory, it would not be able to read it anyway. So, yeah. Ideally, you probably want to have your program connect to some kind of like Vault or HSM and pull secrets from there, or leverage the HSM or Vault to trigger like cryptographic operations this way, so that it's not really executed in your program. But yeah, it's not a trivial topic how to do it in the best way.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Oh, question.
What about audit logs? Do you think that this is the solution?
Sorry?
What about audit logs? Having any kind of software which is monitoring the who's accessing?
Yeah, I mean, audit logs are good, but they are good probably only for, after the disaster, to just checking what happened.
Yeah, of course.
But not necessarily for detection. Like, people try to do different kind of systems nowadays. Like, for example, there's this BPF technology in Linux, and there are some softwares that people produce, try to sell, where they will monitor whatever is happening within your container and like whether it spawns programs or something. The problem is it's very easy usually to work around those detections and find some other way to leverage and get access. So, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So let's maybe move on to the lightning talks. Maciej, you want to talk about downloading cars? So let's give Maciek a minute to set up his laptop.
Now it should.
I can see your screen.
Okay.
And all the Automoto tabs on the screen.
Yes, that's my instead of PowerPoint, we are using Google Chrome. So hello everyone, I'm Maciej. I first of all I have a question. How many of you have gone through this wonderful process of buying a new car in? Was it
new
great?
Car or a used car?
Do you recommend it? Yes, exactly. It's very problematic thing. So if you would be looking around for some car ads or like car sales opportunities and go around, you will find many different things. But most importantly, the thing that will, generally speaking, help a lot is this small number here, which is a VIN number. This is something that is in theory in every car ever and helps to identify the given car. What? Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, and this is very helpful, but if you would go and try to find a database that will take this VIN number and will give you information about the car, theoretically, all of the history of your car is under this number, this one number. But if you would go inside and try some pages, to just use this number, you will get a little bit of information, but you will also get an option of buying more information, and this is paid. This is around 60, 70 zł, which is not that much, but if you are looking through a lot of different things, different cars, it starts to add up to check every single one of them. But fortunately enough, our government prepared something that is called historiapojazdu.gov.pl. It looks like this. It's great. You can access a history of a car, but in this case, you need VIN number, the date of first registration in Poland, and the registration plate. So if you would go through some ads here, you will notice that you don't have the date of the registry in Poland here. In some ads, in some cases, I don't think this is the one, but going around, you could technically find some people who are adding this. But in some cases, people are not adding the registration plate. But, well, there are photos, right? So we can have registration plate here. So, for example, here, we can just go and find one. Sometimes some sellers will not like to share the registration plate, and this is not done by me. Someone just, painted over in paint in this photo. In this photo too, this was actually a car that I was considering, but here, when we cut out this small part, yes, we've done it. It's like CSI Miami, right? Enhance. So, generally speaking, people are giving VIN number in most cases. If there is no VIN number, run, don't even consider it. You can get the license plate from a photo, right? So let's try to do this, and let's go here. Let's insert this VIN number, and the license plate is SBE 3277G. Right. So we are missing just the date of the first registration, right? What can you do? You can brute force it. Yeah, I mean, there is only 365 days in a year, right? The good thing about the date of first registry is also that it almost usually happens after the year or in a year that the car was produced. If it was, first of all, registered in Poland, this will help us. In other cases, you can go to this website that will find you a little bit more information and give you a little bit of dates. But iterating from 2012 to 2023 is also possible. If the car wasn't registered, you will not get any information from this government website. So what can you do next is you can go open up this mode in Chrome. you can find a very interesting call here. You can be very lazy and just copy this as curl, right? And find a very helpful website that will translate everything to Python requests. You can copy it and you can find here, for example, the arguments that we are using, right? So you can wrap it in a little bit of Python and iterate through different dates. It's 2012. It's kind of the assumption can be that the car was registered, so bought. It needs to be bought to registered. It would be in the second half of the year. So I made a little bit of a wrapper here with a function that takes that makes a request, takes the request, looks for some stuff inside with beautiful soup and some iteration through dates with Python. And this is this small script. And we can try to run it. Yeah, that's a good optimization. Yeah, really.
The question was that you can skip or the comment was that you can skip the weekends.
Yeah, you can skip the weekends. I think my script broke, or was it a different date? Because previously I have found the date. I didn't want to use another example, which was super easy and very convenient. No, I don't think so. I tried this many times. So I already took this car. You can see that it doesn't have any information about the registration. And I got and inserted it here, I think, already. Yes, I think it was 2013 year. What was the year of the... Yes, 2013. Yes. Yeah, probably the cookies were run out, because for this one, I remember that it was the 1st of January, actually. I think I checked it before. GKS and 54. Now, anyway, I can probably show you in the logs that it was found somewhere here. Yeah. Yeah. Here it found the date. I don't remember for which car, because it's always a guess. And yeah, that's it. I hope you believe me that this works. It's just the cookies, they sometimes change, and you need to replace them from the request, from the actual request. Because they changed, I think, from, I don't know how old do they get, but you need to repaste it, because I tried it again, and I won't do it right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any more lightning talks? Okay, that's a long silence. We don't have any more. Looks like we don't have any more lightning talks. So thank you everyone for coming today. We have a couple of more announcements at the end. So the announcement number 1 is that the next Pykonik is most likely going to happen at the last Thursday of May, which happens to be 29th of May. Yes. We don't have the agenda for that meetup yet, so if you would like to speak at Pykonik, then you can talk to us either here or on Discord, and we can set you up with the talk for the next meetup. Other than that, PyData will also happen sometime in May, although we don't have a final date. So we're also looking for speakers. So maybe part 2 of that more implementation version or something. So that's second announcement. Third announcement. So I already talked about EuroPython before at this at the Lightning Talks, but one conference that we did not talk about is Polish PyCon, that happening at the end of June. Is it 29th? I think, Philip. Okay, so that's 29th, and it's 3 days long, and there's also more details going to be posted on Discord. And actually, for the competition today that we're running on Discord, we are giving away 50% discount for PyCon PL. So go check that out, the competition, and there's a good chance to win because there's not that many entries so far. Other than that, the other prizes in that competition are JetBrains licenses, like we have every month. Here's Philip. Philip will answer any questions that you have about PyCon. So you can catch him later if you have any more questions. And yeah, as far as I know, some of the agenda is already published. So you can go to pl.pycon.org and you will see the list of talks. And it's in Gliwice, so that's not that far away from here. I think that's it for the announcements. Peter, I'm looking at you. Yes, so we're looking for speakers for Pykonik and PyData. And I think that's it. So now we're going to go to the pub. We're going to wrap all this thing, all the things here, and then we go to the pub. There's some pizza left, as I mentioned before, so feel free to take any with you. Same with water. And yeah, see you at the next Pykonik. Thanks for coming today, and see you next time. Goodbye.